Right, welcome everybody. Just watching folks come in from the waiting room here. Try to turn that off. Everybody should just be able to jump in. Welcome to the second of our panel series here on ITSM metrics. We'll start in just a minute more. Just gonna wait for the entries to trickle here.
And just to be clear, it's the second of our intro section of the ITSM metrics. So we have other
Exactly. Yeah,
panels
thanks,
down the
Mark.
road.
This is just the second setting the stage, as how I've been calling them, setting the stage. All right, I think things have slowed, so let's go ahead and get started real quick. Just few things on the top end, just in case you haven't been following what our intentions here. We are planning a whole series of webinars and Zoom discussions like this and panels around this topic of metrics and dashboards, because we've seen so much interest within the ITSM community. So our general purpose here is to try to give you some real case studies, like actual examples of how people are using data to drive decision makings, to drive improvements to the organization, and et cetera. Another kind of subtle behind the scenes one is we are actually recording the transcripts of these because we hope to get written content in the end. And so we're going to use the transcripts of these panel series to kind of capture the wisdom of our panelists and the wisdom of our webinar participants and try to use that to write some technical papers. And along the way, we hope to create this idea of a journey map. So here's kind of this Candyland prototype that we built, where we know we hear these different things that happen to people as they go on this journey. So examples of, we don't use data around these here parts, or, I don't believe this data. These metrics are not accurate. All kinds of objections that we've experienced along our journeys. And so our hope is to fill this out more completely and have an idea of how to help guide people that are going through their own personal journeys about what obstacles they may encounter, some ideas for how to get over those obstacles, and which ones to anticipate, and perhaps how to avoid them along the way. So with that, this is the second of our three introductory panels on trying to gather this content. So planned for the future is each of our panelists will be sharing kind of their own institution's personal journey around metrics in more detail. We also plan to have specific panel discussions around certain ITSM practices, such as service desk or project management or whatever. Some panels around doing metrics, looking at it from the perspective of a service. And then we hope to also have a panel or panels around executive metrics and how to present information, at a higher, more strategic level and so forth. So, by the way, who am I? So I am Bob Black with Miami University, nestled here in Southwest Ohio. For those unfamiliar, there's always these jokes that run around about how we were a institution or a college before Florida was even a state. Been around for quite some time as a landmark institution. So we have about 15,000 or 25,000 students across multiple campuses. But our main campus has about, 18,000, I'd say, at this point, and around 5,000 faculty, staff, and so forth. So just to give you an idea of our size. So, my own journey, I started as a help desk employee as a student myself here at Miami, and I call it like the magnet. I got trapped here. I did try to escape once. I worked in Belgium for a little while, but then the magnet drew me back to Oxford, Ohio, and met my wife here, and I've been raising a family and so forth. So look forward to talking to you all about how we have approached this problem. And joining me today, we have Celissa.
Is that my cue, Bob?
That's your cue.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Celissa Manley, and I am the Director for IT Service Management at Northern Arizona University. NAU is a 4-year public doctoral university located in Flagstaff, Arizona. We are 7,000 feet above sea level, and we have about 30,000 students. We are a Hispanic serving institution, and we are ever mindful as we sit at the base of these mountains that these are homelands sacred to our Native American community. And as an institution, we actively honor and serve the indigenous who will forever call this land their home. I've worked in higher ed for 25 years across multiple disciplines, from university relations and communication to campus information and visitor services and information technologies. My background is broad, and I actively try to synergize those different disciplines in the work that I do. I draw on ITIL, COBIT, Lean, project management, CISSP, and interestingly enough, FEMA, major incident management practices. I'm tool agnostic, ServiceNow, BMC Jira, Oracle Vantive, homegrown tools. I've worked with them all. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about metrics and our different journeys as we seek to use data to make better business decisions.
And then we also have Deborah with us today. If you don't mind introducing real quick, Deborah.
Hi, my name is Deborah. I go by Deb McDaniel. I'm an associate director for IT with Rutgers University. So I've been with Rutgers University for about 5 years. I have about 35 years of experience working in technology for various different types of organizations. But for the past 5 years, I've been here working at Rutgers University, helping to set up and establish an IT service management program, a service management office, as well as helping to lead gathering the business requirements for the configuration of our consolidated tool that we will be using for enterprise service management, and that includes IT service management. Just a little bit about Rutgers. We are in Rutgers, the state university, the State University of New Jersey. We are a public university. We have lots of activities around research. We're one of the premier research universities in the country. We have about 67,600 undergraduate and graduate students. We have campuses that are co-located across New Jersey, as well as some satellite offices around the world. And so our footprint is huge. We're set up and designed when it comes to IT, central IT administration, plus distributed units. So we have, that's what we consider to be Rutgers IT. So that's just a little bit about us.
And also from Rutgers joining us today is Johnson, if you want to say hello.
Hi, all. My name is Johnson Moreno LaSalle. I'm an ITSM business analyst at Rutgers University. I work with Deb in the service management office. She did a very good job at explaining who we are and what Rutgers has to offer as far as myself goes. I have quite a broad range of experience as well with ITIL and other service management philosophies. And for over the last 10 years, I've been working in higher ed. And as far as our metrics and reporting goes, I now currently work at Rutgers and participating in our reporting and metrics as we grow and develop into a more mature organization from that perspective. And from previous institutions that I worked at, I also helped initiate and start the foundation for reporting and metrics as well. So I'm glad to be here and be able to share all this experience with you all.
Oh, Bob, you're muted, Bob.
Sorry about that. I lost my
problem.
Zoom controls as I switched from sharing screen. So I'm back. So I'm going to stop sharing screen and we're just going to start going through the panel questions. I did mean to mention that we've got chat and Q&A going on. So encourage you all to use chat to talk to each other. If you do have specific questions for the panelists, please put them in the Q&A. It's just a little easier to manage. And we will try to get to those. So we've got 3 questions that we're going to try to go through and briefly respond to across our panel, and then we'll feed in some questions in the middle if we can, and definitely try to have you all out of here within the hour. So I am going to end our first poll real quick here. Looks like about 25% of the people were practice or process owners, another 25% in management. So half of our audience there for today, and then some service managers and IT directors rounding it out for those that were wondering who's with you. Here I can share those results. But let me start our second poll question. Maybe, oh, I can't share the results and launch the new poll at the same time. So there we go. So second question for everybody is around your maturity for those in the audience. So for our panelists, while they are answering that, let's start with our first question, which is, what types of metrics have you been involved in using or generating? And we'll start with Celissa.
Great, thanks, Bob. So I have been involved with 3 different types of metrics. The 3 types that I've worked most closely with are operational metrics, service metrics, and practice metrics. So a little bit more about each of those. Operational metrics are, I think, where many of us begin our journey. When we're talking about operational metrics, we may be asking ourselves, how busy is my service desk or my project management office? You might be trying to answer questions like, how many staff do I need in total, or on Mondays at 9 a.m.? And you're trying to suss out, is my operation successful? And a lot of the example measurements in this operational space are call volume, walk-up volume, tickets open, tickets aging, tickets closed in a reporting period, call abandonment rates, average speed to answer, first contact resolution. Is this sounding kind of familiar? Especially if you worked at a service desk. This is the bread and butter, right? Our data sources for operational metrics are often our ITSM platform and our ACD, or automatic call direct system. We can get a lot of data out of that tool. Our audiences in operational metrics, and this was true for me, I managed a service desk for 10 years. Our audience are often ourselves, our managers, our assistant managers, our shift supervisors. We use this information to better manage our world, and our own staff, to let them know how they're performing and maybe opportunities for improvement. Maybe our supervisor, when we want to be able to say that we're running the help desk well. Service metrics are a step aside from that. Questions you may be asking that lead you on a service metric journey include, do the services and service offerings provided by the IT organization meet the needs of the enterprise? Are there services that are more in demand or perhaps waning? Are there services that may require additional investment, restructuring, or maybe nearing their natural sunset? Some of the things we look at in this space are different than when we're managing a service desk. Managing a portfolio of services requires that we look at things like the take rate or adoption rate for each service and the trend of adoption of that service over time, the total cost of ownership of whether or not we can financially sustain that service and have cost recovery sussed out, the availability and uptime of the service. And we might do customer satisfaction polling, although it's a little bit different than the kind of customer satisfaction polling we do at the help desk, right? Like at the service desk, we'll ask folks, did we answer quickly? Were we friendly? And did you get the right answer? Customer satisfaction surveys at the service level are more looking at fit gap analysis of the service offerings relative to institutional needs. And I think all of us in ITSM use practice metrics or want to. Practice metrics tell us whether or not our processes like incident, problem, and change are meeting their process objectives. So we may look at the number of unauthorized changes or the number of changes that result in incidents. We may look at the average time during a major incident to get to detection, diagnosis, and remediation. And we're thinking about improvement. We're thinking about how can we make this incident management practice faster? How can we improve our time to market with the changes we put through for the business? So those are things that are often sourced out of our ITSM tool, whereas your service metrics data sources may be much more broad and involve your financial system, your budgeting system, your HR system, and other tools, particularly as you get into total cost of ownership. So that's where I've been in the past. I don't know if that helps, but operational process and service metrics are kind of where I've lived.
Great, thanks, Alyssa. So let's see, I'm gonna turn it over to the Rutgers crew and see if they have anything that they want to add or you know, just kind of give us the perspective of what metrics they've used at Rutgers.
Sure. So at Rutgers, you did a poll on the maturity of an organization in gathering metrics. And so here at Rutgers, we just started using, service management formally. We've been using it informally, but formally as a practice within our organization. And so what we found when it comes to data and metrics and measurements is that we have pockets of excellence. There are certainly groups like our help desk who are tracking those operational metrics that Salissa mentioned. But we also have a lot of groups, especially since we're combining as Rutgers IT and starting to look at IT service management from both a central and a distributed unit type of arena. We also have found that we have a lot of groups that really don't know where to start. And quite frankly, that's really where we are. A lot of people don't know where to start, or they have metrics that they've been measuring. And we're trying to incorporate those and say, how would this fit for the overall university? How would it work in helping us to track those metrics? But I did reach out to our groups, to talk about metrics. And as Salissa mentioned, right now we have a lot of those metrics around operational. We track things like the total number of contacts, whether it be by phone or walk-in or email, those types of metrics. We also have customer satisfaction surveys, but again, it's not measuring the satisfaction with the service, it's measuring the satisfaction with the help desk for the most part. We also look at things like call abandonment rate, as well as, unplanned and downtime for our help desks as well. In the areas for our students, we focus on things like walk-ins for lab services, for our labs, how many people are using our labs, what types of services that they are asking for or requesting from our labs, printing, those types of things of that nature. But for the most part for us, we're really in a stage where we're trying to corral all of these things together and talk about how can we look at those operational metrics and come up with dashboards that are going to be, helpful to those managers who are managing those daily, day-to-day types of operations. And of course, as we grow and mature as an organization, we'll start to take a closer look at service and practice metrics, as Salissa mentioned, but right now we're in the beginning, in the trenches, really just looking at operational metrics for the most part. Gianci?
To chime in on that as well, and I was looking over the results of the poll, there do appear to be a lot of people that are on the same boat, and some additional insight that might be useful is that as we begin this journey right into maturing and further developing this reporting and metrics, one of the major areas is that a lot of these groups that we're working with, they've either tracked very basic metrics before, or they may need additional guidance on answering some questions like, what are my KPIs, right? That's the current buzzword that everyone, loves to discuss, right? Really helping them measure, because everyone loves data, right? They want to track everything. And part of that discussion that we have as we have implemented reporting is having that conversation. What do you actually need? right? Is there a specific area that you're looking to answer? What are we looking for? And if you're a part of any organization that's as large as the one that we have, we know that different groups are going to have different perspectives on that, right? So, but usually there's almost like an underlying string that kind of pulls everyone together, and that's kind of where we are right now, trying to identify that aspect. And again, it more often than not really does materialize in those operational, first level metrics.
Awesome, thanks. And then just add in the Miami University perspective. Kind of interesting. I'm going to slice the cake maybe a different direction than Celissa. I really loved how she described the process or the practice and the service and the operational metrics. One of the things that got me really started on this journey was a paper from Pink Elephant back in, I think it was like 2010, that was called Measuring ITSM, Are Your Processes Making the Grade? And when I reviewed some of that material, I found it interesting that they really said, think of it in terms of 4 different types of metrics. And that really resonated and stuck with me. So the types that they offered were compliance, quality, which has to do with if the if the practice or the thing that you're measuring is free of defects. So is it error free? Performance, which they tended to really focus on speed, right? Speed of delivery, and then value. And those were the 4 categories that started out. And this paper was interesting because it said, take any of your ITSM practices and start building charts that help you understand how many metrics you have in each of those 4 categories, and that you can kind of then have metrics around your own journey of maturity in your metrics program. And that meta kind of approach really sunk in with me, because it gave me a way to say, oh, we can just start somewhere and then, and be able to assess and measure how we're progressing. It's been interesting that we've deviated, I would say, from those 4, and that I really look at across our metrics landscape right now, and we've classified them slightly differently. So just to share those, the way I find us doing it right now is we have what I call context metrics. So you can apply this to a practice, or you can apply this to a service, or you can apply this, to anything. And so for us, it is really the context, right? We're just asking the basic, how much of this is there, whether that's subscribers to a service or incidents in the incident management process, and so forth, So basically, what is it? Who's using it? Like, where does it exist in the universe, right? And so that knowing that we, want to be able to compare things, and not all things are created equal. And so it gives us, some, I guess, just context for what it is that we're looking at. So context metrics, then performance metrics. For us, really, I tend to call these the leading metrics. So these are the things that help us internally know, how things are going, in hopes that we can produce the 3rd category of metrics that we use, which we call value metrics. So value metrics are the metrics where we actually know and have evidence that what we're doing is performing the job, right? Leading metrics for us are more about indicators, right? We think if we do these things well. So for example, we think if we have performance measures around meeting service level agreements, or just service level targets, if you will, time to resolution metrics, those kinds of things. If we have those kinds of good performance outcomes, we think that then we will have good value metrics, where we might look at something like customer satisfaction, or we do an annual survey. There used to be a survey called TechQual or TechQual Plus out of, I think it was University of Georgia, that was like many institutions did. They stopped doing that some years ago, but we've continued on our own within the university, which is nice because we have longitudinal data dating back to 2011 around the same 7 questions, right? Same 7 questions every year across, a wide audience of faculty, staff, and students. So again, it gives us that kind of like, are we getting the job done perspective from the campus? So context, performance, value, and then the fourth one that I wanted to mention is compliance, because I find this one to be the hardest. And so, one of the things that we did when we launched our ITIL practices, then called processes, was we talked a lot about policy. What's the policy of, participating in this practice and so forth. And so, but we found those things are hard to measure. And so we have this category of compliance measures that we're basically looking at doing some kind of inspection or audit to really determine, are we doing things the way that we said we were going to do them? And this is important because if we don't do this, then it's possible that the outputs and the other metrics that we're gathering in the performance and the value session are not a result of the practice or not a result of our design, right? They're just an accident. It could be a good accident or a bad accident. And so a lot of what we're trying to assess with those compliance metrics is, are we doing things the way that the design suggests that we're doing? And, therefore that we can draw some better causal links rather than correlating links between the things, on the back end and the things on the front end. So those are the kind of the four categories that we use: context, performance, value, and compliance, as we look at whether it's a service or an ITIL practice or whatever.
Bob, you have a question in the Q&A, and by the way, I encourage folks to use the Q&A. I mean, I see there's some questions in the chat too, and I'll get to those in a second in between our canned questions, but related to your answer just now, Bob, can you give an example of a value metric?
So a lot of our value metrics, so it depends. So within a practice, if you're doing a project, it would be, did the project achieve its business objectives? So if you had amount of money that you were trying to save as the result of a project, did it save that money? Or, in incident management, that I do think customer satisfaction is a good value metric. Did the person get what they were asking for? And did they feel good about it, at the end? In a service, I think it's, if you do any kind of surveys or focus groups around, asking people, is this service valuable, or, are you
like how important it is to getting your job
yeah,
done?
right. Yeah. I think it's interesting. The thing that's going on in my brain here, if you can watch the gears turning, is that in a lot of corporate and private entities, we can do this more easily because people are paying for services. And so we can kind of look at some of are people, willing to suffer a price increase or not, and that's a lot harder to do here. We tend to not, at least we don't really charge for anything. It's just part of what you get, whether you're faculty, staff, or student. Maybe some internal funny money, behind the scenes stuff, but individual consumers don't necessarily see that stuff. So anyway, that's where my head was going around. Yeah. I wish we had that financial dollar value to put on some of the stuff that is harder to trace down. Yeah,
that totally makes sense. And by the way, we had one question that's has some discussion and even an answer from Bob, but I believe the heart of this question is around metrics, but they're asking basically, like, do folks have sort of one ticket or submission form, or do they have service specific, separate incident forms, separate request forms? And I imagine the question behind the question is probably, are you able to leverage different forms to gather different kinds of metrics, from different attributes? Anybody want to take that one from our panel? Bob, I know you kind of answered that you do have explicitly different forms.
I'll answer just to repeat what's in the chat, but for those that aren't seeing that, we do. And so on the incident side, I would say it's rarer, but we do have specific incident reporting things, especially around things like printing, Wi-Fi, things where location matters. We tend to have specific forms, I guess. That's kind of a driver sitting here thinking about it, but we do. And then we do have many, I think we have around 240 service request specific forms that have to do with, very specific subscription or interaction type things where somebody wants to change their default configuration, their default, how they subscribe to the service, and how might they go about that, or add on, subscribe to something that they aren't already subscribed to.
Excellent. Anybody else want to address that from the panel in terms of different types of request or incident forms, or sort of one standard request form or incident form?
I can chime in a little bit here. So here at Rutgers, we recently launched our self-service portal, our Rutgers IT Help portal, using the Now platform. And what we've done so far is we do have our Get Help page. And what we've done is essentially try to have one form with multiple user criteria so that we can then route it to areas as necessary. And our service catalog works the same way in terms of having different user criteria. This way we can try to have everything as much as we can in one location while still allowing our user base to be able to parse out what they need and route incidents where they need to go, and therefore allow ourselves to pull some metrics from that as well.
Great. Thanks, Chelsea.
Okay, well, let's advance us here to our second hand panel question, if that's all right, and have us each talk about really where did you get started is the basic question, or maybe how did you get started on your journey. And so we'll start with Celissa.
Okay, thanks, Bob. I see that 24% of the folks on this call don't know where to start. So I think this is a really important question. I'm going to answer it two different ways, hopefully appealing to both our free spirits, our innovators, our big picture thinkers, and also to those folks who are in the position of, oh, the big picture is great, but I got to do something this quarter. So how do I start? What do I do first? Just give me the numbered steps. So first, from the big picture view, one of ITIL's principles is start from where you are, no matter where you are in your journey. This is no different than any other practice, whether it's an ITSM practice or a yoga practice or a running practice. Start from where you are. You can't wait to get in shape to start getting in shape, right? So if all you can do in the beginning is a count of call volume or tickets in or tickets out, start with where you are. Embrace progressive elaboration. Improve over time. Get feedback. Produce draft reports, reflect them to your leadership, and see if you're answering the right questions. If you don't know what problem you're trying to solve or what result you're trying to obtain, you're apt to go down a rabbit hole. So think about why you're doing this in your institution. It might be to reduce cost. It might be to improve customer satisfaction. It might be to answer questions about why your tech fee just went up. So think about those really important business drivers that are specific to you. And while you're doing that, fight against the scarcity mentality. I think that we get stuck thinking, I can't because I don't have staff. I can't because I don't have an expensive ITSM platform. You can do a lot. I had a great dashboard of interactive service metrics at a past institution using just OneDrive and Tableau and collecting data once a quarter from my service owners and my product managers. So don't hold yourself back. Embrace abundance. You can do this, and you can start simple. It's just, that acronym KISS, keep it simple, keep it super simple. That can apply here. Now, if you want to get started and you haven't done these things yet, define your services and your service offerings. That's really important. You're not going to be able to start on a service metrics journey until you know what your services are. You're not going to be able to classify the questions coming into your service desk until you know what services and service offerings people are asking about. That's a journey. There's a whole different white paper on building your catalog of services and service offerings. But that is a great place to start if you haven't done that yet. It's also going to be a journey that requires friends. You're going to need a cadre of adventurers to go on this journey in Bob's board game. And so your product managers and your service owners are going to be the ones that help you with the definitions and with gathering the data. So know who they are, name them, get them together, have regular meetings, build a community of practice, even if you're a team of one. So I think from a practical standpoint, define your services, define your service offerings. And if you can do nothing else, start with simple counting. Counts of things can be very powerful, trend them over time and grow from there. Hopefully that answers both sides of the where to start question.
Thanks, Alyssa. Let's see, Rutgers, anything to add or different suggestions of where you started and how people might be able to take advantage of starting in a similar place?
All right, so I wasn't here particularly at the start of metrics at Rutgers University, but I was at the start at a different institution. So I will share my experience with that, and to a large extent, it really does mimic what Celissa mentioned. And the confusion that we experienced there was everyone wanted to measure something, but no one knew what they were measuring. And for this particular experience, we were essentially onboarding areas that were student facing, like the registrar's office, financial aid, and at the same time, human resources was also trying to onboard and defining that service catalog, right, so to speak, of what are you actually offering? What are we going to try to measure, whether it be via configuration item and whatever tool you're using for, or a formal portfolio? What are we actually trying to really get an answer to? And that ended up being the most important part of our journey, because again, you can pull all the data if you want. Tools like ServiceNow, Salesforce will just give you a data dump, right? But how do you parse through it? You need to have that definition. And once you have that understanding, and in this particular example that I'm thinking of, once we knew that we were trying to get, for example, how many requests came into the registrar's office for people looking for one-on-one advising, or whether or not they needed additional help with documentations, major changes, and things like that, we were able to come up with a set of metrics that essentially evolved a little bit past operational into service oriented for that registrar's office to really be able to identify, one, any major trends that they needed to do, right? Two, obviously we have the operational volume that's coming in. And most importantly, for this particular example, once they had the idea, they wanted to make that work visible, not just for themselves, but for the institution as a whole, right? So they needed to report either, to the president, the other councils. They were able to really visualize that. And at that point in time, if memory serves, they were working with the Tableau tool to make it past that baseline. Oh, I have a CSV, a spreadsheet of data with some basic charts, and really start to expand out. But as again, tying it back to what Celissa said, we had to start where we were, right? We started out very simple. Okay, these are the 5 things that we do. Let's start tracking that first. All right, we know what those 5 things are. What do we want to get from these 5 things now that we have these numbers coming in? All right, we're trying to identify the handoffs, right? We're trying to identify what the trend is per semester. And from there on out, you can really start to build. And that is the case that we have right now with some of our current Rutgers customers. They've had some of that basic data coming in, and now we're getting to that point where we can start taking a bigger picture look, right? And really start that hopeful next step into maturing that visualization and really moving past that organizational level basic metrics.
Awesome. Thank you. Anything you wanted to add, Deb? I just didn't want to.
Yeah, no worries. I agree with everything that both Celissa and Gianci have said. I think what I found as a challenge in working with organizations that are new to service management is that they want to target things like service level agreements, but they don't really have an understanding of what it takes to build a service level agreement from an end-to-end process or understanding. They're usually focused on how long did it take me to do my little not itty bitty, but my piece of work, and not looking at the service as a whole. You know, how long did it take from the time, you know, the request was made or a ticket was put in for an incident to when you actually were able to resolve it or when you were actually able to deliver the service. And so as a result, a lot of people are talking about service level agreements and they don't even really understand what that is. So I would say to anyone who's getting started, don't start by targeting things like service level agreements. Start by understanding what it is that you could measure, you know, operationally, and then start to look at how you deliver that service, how you deliver those products to your customers, and start to add up all those piece parts. And then you can start to establish what is really a true service level agreement that you can come up with, or at least a target in relationship to your response and your resolution times. And I always say with service level agreements, if you're going to look at those, you want to start by looking at your response time, because believe it or not, if you can start to respond faster, you'll start to be able to get the resolution faster, right? So if you're going to go down that journey, if you're at that stage, you know, start by looking at your response times first, then start worrying about your resolution times.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So yeah, just adding, I think where to get started has been pretty thoroughly covered, but I'll try to add maybe a couple of perspectives as I look back maybe in the rear view mirror about where we began and how we got to where we are at Miami. The thing that kind of pokes out at me is I think fundamentally it came down to two things that allowed us to get traction. One was responding to existing pain. And this has come at different points, but you know, I go way back. I was actually trying to dig up the very first PowerPoint of service desk metrics that I remember doing in my head, and it's on an old file system, and I gave up. I couldn't find it, but you know, decades ago. And you know, it was really that there was a lot of criticism around the performance, and that was around 2008, and there was the austerity period, and there were being decisions made about where to make cuts and so forth. And so out of that grew a need to have some data. And so, you know, I remember helping produce a lot of metrics around how things were going, and trying to model what it might look like if we, you know, reduce service or reduce resource or whatever, right? So responding to existing pain is not a bad way to get started, because people will care about the data that you have to offer. This happened to us again when we decided to outsource our service desk back in 2017, so I guess 5 years ago or so. And all of a sudden there was tremendous interest in how that outsourced organization was performing. Whereas when we had the service desk internally, there were people that cared about the data, but it wasn't as broad of an audience. When we outsourced it, now all of a sudden everybody had an interest. And so it was a lot easier to basically gain some traction around those data. And an interesting thing that I observe in that is as we used that data to answer those pain points, it became easier to use other data to address other types of situations that weren't responding to immediate pain. People became familiar with this idea that they do care about numbers and that numbers can help them, make decisions and so forth, which is kind of the second category of how to start, which is anticipating future pain. I think is another great place to start. So it's really, where do I see our organization struggling, and where do I think we're going to encounter friction in the future? And I realize that can be a little bit of a creative process, but if you can, in the Gretzky terms, skate to where the puck is going to be, then you can show up at the table with some data to help when those moments happen. You're going to swing and a miss on some of this, because you are doing doing some guesswork and some anticipating, but if you have situations where you see potential things, certain services where you expect disruption can be good, or places where you think there is a new technology on the horizon, or a service that isn't being offered that maybe the institution ought to offer, like any of those kinds of things where you can see an opportunity to start building numbers that allow you to bring data to the table can really resonate well. And so, I guess that's the thing I would add, is a little bit on a focus on the pain, which sounds bad. I don't know how else to say it, but, it's really around trying to, people respond better in a crisis. And so if you bring numbers, to those kind of crises, I'm not trying, don't create a crisis in order to bring numbers. Don't hear me wrong, folks. But it can cause you to then be able to bring numbers to other situations where it's not a crisis, has been my experience. So our last panel question for today, unless let me check, Mark, see if anything's come up in the Q&A.
Nope, you look ready to proceed.
Yep. So our third question really is around audience. So how do you decide to include and who to share your metrics with? So again, we'll start with Celissa, if you don't mind.
Sure. I think who you share your metrics with and how you share your metrics really comes back to that question of what's the problem to be solved or the result to be obtained? Or as Bob said, where are you feeling the pain, or where is that puck going to be? I think we go on a journey from an inward mindset to an outward mindset. And we begin looking at those metrics that we may only share with ourselves or with our immediate staff. This is particularly true if you're using metrics to manage your service desk, your help desk, your network operations center, maybe your project management office. And that's an inward audience. You can be a little less formal. You can be a little bit more granular and a little bit more detailed. But there are other audiences. I think when we start to move from the inward mindset outwards, and we start thinking about, well, so how can I use these data to get more resources for my service desk? I need more staff, or I need more overnight staff. Then we start sharing our metrics with leadership because we want something. We want resources, we want funding, we want staff, we want a better ITSM platform, but we need to use what we have to show that we have those needs. When we start communicating higher and higher in the organization, we have to change how we present and what we present. The metrics have to be simpler. A lot of times this is where we have to start bringing in that financial element, because really when we can start talking in dollars and cents, then we can start getting the attention of leadership and senior leadership in the organization. So how do we convert that? That's when we might talk about cost per call. What's my total operating cost for my service desk? And if I divide that by my total number of contacts, how much is it costing me for every call or contact that I respond to? Cost per contact can be powerful, and that's when you start bringing your audience up to another level. And then as we go further in that outward mindset, we might start thinking about the organization or the enterprise as a whole. We might start sharing our metrics with our units or our customers. And this can be really scary, but it can also be really powerful. So I've done this in another institution that was going through services streamlining, which is a fancy word for saying, why do we have 3 tools to do video conferencing? Why do we have 5 classroom polling technologies? Why does the math department run its own email server instead of using the central email server, right? So by sharing our performance metrics, our availability, our uptime, our resource and risk scores, broadly, we can have an open, authentic, and transparent conversation around centralization and services streamlining. It's also really powerful in dealing with customer dissatisfaction, which none of us like to talk about, but we all have to address in one way or another. Sometimes customers complain. Sometimes there's an opportunity gap. You might be hearing that a certain service is unreliable, but if you're tracking availability and uptime and you can walk with your customer through your change management process, through your trend data about availability, you can talk about whether or not you really are hitting however many nines you've set forward to do. So sharing that data transparently and publicly can be very, very powerful. Should you start there? Oh, no. No, no. But it is sort of an aspirational goal that you may want to embrace down the road.
Very good. Thank you.
I wrote down your quote, sometimes customers complain.
Yeah.
Just every once in a while that happens, yes.
I know we don't want to acknowledge it, but it has happened in the past. It will probably happen again in the future.
Ever read A Complaint is a Gift? I think that somebody have the book title handy. That's a great read, by the way. Rutgers, anything you want to add in terms or your perspective on audience? I'm seeing a Deb shake no.
Yeah, for me, Celissa hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, okay. I'll add a few thoughts just from my perspective, Miami perspective. One of the things I like to emphasize when we think about audience of metrics, especially if you are feeling like you're at the start of the journey and not the end, is to really emphasize that using metrics is an invitation for a conversation. It is not, you're not bringing some kind of universal truth to the table. And if you approach it that way, you're probably going to struggle to really make your metrics mature. You really have to approach it from the perspective of, this is what I know based on the data that I have. Now let's look at it together and understand if it's correct, if it resonates with you, what might be missing and so forth. And so a lot of that can reduce some of the stress. I know, so for us, like in terms of who to include, we definitely followed a similar pattern where we feel a lot of pressure. It tends to be small internal, right? So at this point, most of our discussions are, if you're familiar with the service value chain, where you have users and customers, actually consuming and using your services. And then we've got our, vendors at the other end of the extreme, and we're kind of in the middle providing the services. Most of our discussions are with people on the provider end of that equation. There's been a lot of hesitation to pull in users and customers into looking at a lot of our data. So my perspective is we're looking to gain trust, and we try to grow trust. And it's been interesting, like some specific examples when it comes to service desk metrics. At first, it was just inside our central IT. And then it was like, we ought to start including people outside of the central IT. Let's bring those into the conversation. And then it got bigger. We actually hold an annual. Now, this is on incident and request fulfillment types of things, but we actually hold an annual, we call it Support Ticket Summit, where we just open up anybody and we come and we look at the high level data. Where does stuff start? What channel are people using? What patterns? What knowledge base articles are popular? What services are driving volume? What, all those kinds of things. And we just kind of walk through some standard material at this point. But, but we always approach it from the perspective of an invitation to have a conversation about this. So, specific roles that we're targeting, we are always trying to ask ourselves, okay, is this whatever, metric set that we're looking at, what practice owners have a piece of this, have a stake in this? What service managers have a stake in this? What configuration item owners have a stake in this? What we call them sponsors, but service strategists have a stake in this? What technical experts have a stake in this? And what resource managers? And we kind of walk through that checklist anytime we're really putting some serious data out there, and kind of make sure that we're involving everybody that's on that list, or at least an invitation to that conversation, right? And we found that to be pretty helpful. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that, we hear a lot of objections around things like the biggest one that bothers me, so be prepared for this, is people that are afraid of the truth. So maybe that's the one that I'll kind of address and leave some of the others for later. One of my pet peeves is when I have someone that wants to massage the data to tell the story that they want to tell before they're willing to invite people to look at the data. And it takes definitely some perseverance and skill to be able to kind of cut through that and make sure that, you know, you're providing genuine data, because the second that you compromise on that, then you've compromised your ability to ever provide objective data in the future. And so, you know, beware that and maybe avoid, you know, if you have a situation, your boss says what your boss says and you can't necessarily override them, well, then you may not want to pursue, you know, bringing other people into a conversation until you get your boss on board with, hey, this is the story. Remember, this is an invitation to the conversation. Or not, it's not a judgment. It's not a final judgment, and, you know, and work, manage up on those things. But, you know, don't be afraid to follow the data is got to be a flag that you're willing to carry if you're going to go on this journey. Go where the data takes you, not where you want it to lead you. And that's a really important thing, and can really influence who you want to involve, because you want to bring those allies in and people that are willing to take that objective view of the truth with you. And, you know, use the data to help inform the situation versus someone that's trying to get numbers to help justify an already made decision or interpretation of the universe. So, yeah.
That's super important, Bob. The authenticity and integrity of your data collection and presentation has to be unquestionable from the beginning. If you're in a position where you're being asked to create data to sell a story, then that's not where you want to be working. I would say, you know, +1 on this notion that metrics don't answer questions. Metrics tell leaders what questions they should ask. Metrics help us find the narrative and find the story. And to Bob's point, if on your team, it might not be in your service desk team or where you locally are, metrics will drive organizational change. So OCM, organizational change management. You may want to chat with or partner with or read up about methodologies like ProSci or other organizational change management techniques, because metrics can be scary. What you shine a light on can make people uncomfortable. It can create anxiety in a staff body. And we have to be mindful that what gets measured gets done. And there is such a thing as, you know, in statistical science, we call it a perverse incentive, where, you know, I ran into this in the help desk. I was keeping metrics on how many tickets we had open. And I came in one day and they were all closed. Our queue was 0. And the student employee there was smiling, beaming. And I said, how did you do it, James? How did you close all the tickets? And he's like, oh, I just clicked the close button. It was really easy. He hadn't actually resolved or remediated anything, but that was what I was rewarding, unbeknownst to me. So we have to really be mindful that what gets measured gets done.
Yeah, very, very good. Well, that is awesome. So I guess I'm just looking at chat, looking to see if there were any QA things. I know Mark, and probably should have given Mark an opportunity to introduce himself. He volunteered to be kind of our chat and Q&A facilitator today, and I see that he had to run at 1. So thanks to Mark from Duquesne for jumping in and helping out with the panel in that way. So I don't know, any parting thoughts from anybody? I feel pretty good from Miami perspective, but if there was anything anybody wanted to share, otherwise, I think we can conclude this second panel. And, you know, stay tuned. We have a third introduction panel coming up. And then we really all plan to individually dive a little deeper into our specific stories and the tools we use and the metrics we use, and show some examples and all those kinds of things in the upcoming weeks and months. So thanks for being here today, and
Thank you,
appreciate
everyone.
you all. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, the panel.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.